Bonjour, habari saleo. My name is Daniel Adeni, a professional officer at Eclay Africa.
My name is Sinetemba Mtetwa, an intern at Eclay Africa.
My name is Paul Curry, manager of the Urban Systems Unit at Eclay Africa. On behalf of Eclay Africa, the African Centre for Cities, Our Future Cities, and partners, I'm excited to welcome all of you to the Rise Africa 2021 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing as a platform of thinkers, doers, and enablers, committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
Rise Africa is about building active networks across academia, government, private sector, civil society, and the arts.
Our entry point is not based on articulating problems followed by proposing solutions, but rather on celebrating our cities as places of innovation and culture, while asking, what more can we do to make them sustainable, inclusive, and vibrant?
This festival is hosting 46 sessions from across 16 countries in Africa and the world. Every session aims to share new ideas, showcase ongoing actions, and launch new initiatives by bringing participants together to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you to commit to one or more specific actions that you or your organization will take on. As this session closes, you will be redirected to a survey in which you can articulate these actions. We will follow up on these committed actions throughout the year and offer resources, connections, and support. In this way, we are testing the idea that events can galvanize actions, and we hope that you will join us in this effort.
Beyond the session, there are many ways to take part in the festival.
Register for further sessions.
Vote for your favorites in the photo competition.
Watch a variety of inspiring video provocations.
Test your knowledge of African cities from our daily quiz.
And listen and dance to the Rise Africa 2021 playlist.
We hope that you will make all the attempts to reach out to new people and build long-lasting connections.
Before we begin, it is important to note that this session is being recorded, and that by participating, you are consenting to be recorded. All the recordings will be available on the program page after the festival.
And may I say that creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities. So we invite you to enter this session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming. Thank you very much.
To my future children, I bequeath this continent, borders lowered and turned into a soft pile of dust, smooth sand under steady feet. Your birthright is a country of flowers, a city that holds you even with your complicated lineage, the way this city has held my heart, held its arms out for all of the lost people who found solace in it. Your heirloom is this land and all its wormholes, portals hidden in plain sight between city skyscrapers, where people from here resemble people from far away places, and differences are muted while life happens. I reimagine you a country that does not cage its doves, a bequest of waters that pool precious histories, mountains that stand guard to protect against the unknown, a nation who preserves compassion over everything else, a mouth that can home many languages, and a spirit that rises above its fears.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are very excited that you're here to learn about designing playful cities for and with children. We're here representing Play Africa, South Africa's first children's museum. My name is Rachel Folks. My background is in early childhood education, and I'm passionate about innovative pedagogies like design thinking.
Hello, everyone. And as you may already know that from my bio, I am Shiko Kanyoka. My background is in architecture, and vastly put, I have a deep interest and passion for finding solutions for cities to accommodate the full complexity of our humanity and our ecosystem in just and equitable ways.
So I'm going to share my screen with you now. In our session today, we'll begin by exploring the value of play and playful spaces in cities. And then you'll get a chance to try out the methodology that we've been developing. And then we'll leave time for questions, of course. But first, since we are from a children's museum, we would like everyone to get into a playful mindset. So please quickly grab just a little bit of paper and a pencil and a pen. You will need it later too. All right. Now, to get in this playful mindset, please write the first letter of your name in the middle of the paper. Now, turn that letter into a monster. This was mine, for example. When you're done, if you're feeling brave, please show us. Anyone feeling brave? Oh, that's a very friendly monster. Oh, look at these friendly monsters. Okay, now we're in the right headspace for us to continue. Riko's going to lead us through an exploration around the value of play. Oh, and if you are having difficulty seeing the full screen, sorry, you can minimize the video on the right if you are having difficulty seeing the full screen. Okay, Shriko, now it's over to you.
To kick off today's explorations on the value of play, I would like to highlight how children in Africa make up 40% of the overall population, which is quite young and makes Africa the youngest continent. I think I'm just going to switch off my video because my internet is not too great today. Sorry about that. Okay, I'd like to highlight how children make up 40% of the overall population, which is quite young and makes Africa the youngest continent. If we were to include young adults as well, 60% of the population is under the age of 25. For comparison with other regions across the globe, Western Europe's population of under 15s sits at 20%, while in the USA, it sits at 19%, with China sitting at 18%. If we narrow down our lens on Africa to South Africa, the population of under 15s only is at 30% of the country's population. Some of our major factors that contribute to Africa's statistics are high fertility and a low child mortality rate. Considering this high population of children in Africa, I would say it should be unthinkable to see children excluded in development agendas as they are today. As I take you through this discourse on play, I would also like for each individual here to take this as an opportunity to think about your individual work, whatever it may be. How does it empower children? How can it be more inclusive of children's voices and their creativity? How can it be more playful? I assume that some won't have the answers right now, but it may be valuable for your thoughts to linger a bit around these prompts as I take you through this presentation. The relationship between play and child development is one that is important to understand in order to effectively incorporate playful spaces in urban developments and placemaking initiatives. Early developmental years of children are highly crucial, as this is the period when a human's brain is highly elastic. There are a multitude of environmental factors that can either positively or negatively influence the development of a growing child. A child's development can either be optimal or suboptimal, depending on the factors in their environment. These can be physical or non-physical factors, such as poverty, access to resources, healthcare, education, food, caregivers, and crime, just to name a few. There are many facets of child development that can be affected by these environmental factors. And intellectual development. What makes play particularly fascinating when exploring child development is its capacity to positively support all the mentioned facets of child development. With 40% of Africa's population being under 15, it is a shame to observe how often overlooked play is as an essential aid in supporting healthy child development. That's a very large portion of our society whose healthy development is not well considered by spatial designers. Now, I have been mentioning play a lot, and I would like to know what images usually come to mind for you when you think of play. You may take a moment to visualize this for yourself, or you can send messages in our chat box just to share with us what you think play is, what you think play looks like. How many of you pictured children playing games, football, or with dolls? You're not wrong, but the tendency, if you did think that way, you're not wrong, but the tendencies of looking at it through limiting lenses has resulted in little innovation in play initiatives and interventions. I would like to read out an excerpt from the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child that stresses how expansive and valuable play is. The excerpt reads, "Children's play is any behavior, activity, or process initiated, controlled, and structured by children themselves. Play is non-compulsory by intrinsic motivation and undertaken for its own sake, rather than as a means to an end. It may take infinite forms, but the key characteristics of play are fun, uncertainty, challenge, flexibility, and non-productivity. While play is often considered non-essential, the committee reaffirms that it is a fundamental and vital dimension of the pleasure of childhood and is an essential component of children's development. Play can be categorized as free and guided play. In free play, children do what they want, however they want. Here, I challenge you to imagine a scene of free play where children are playing with craft materials and freely using them as they want and as they wish. In guided play, you have an adult role. Here you may imagine the adult's role, including the careful curation and preparation of materials to encourage a certain exploration. The adult may initiate the play, and as children play with the materials, the adult asks key and open-ended questions to encourage children to think more about their choices. In a guided play setting, you may have the adult ask questions like, why did you use that material? What would happen if you put that on top? What would happen if you put this together? It can be difficult to tell the difference between the two, as they can seem quite similar on the surface. They are both child-led processes after all. To briefly provide a guiding factor in distinguishing the two, look at the role of the adult. Both types of play are valuable. Free play can be for the sake of it, and it provides children with opportunities for spontaneous learning moments, whereas guided play makes use of planned learning outcomes. This is some of the knowledge that can prove to be useful in decision-making processes when creating playful environments. As a designer, you may want to understand whether you're aiming for free play or you're aiming to increase caregiver and child interaction through guided play, for example. Play is the way children acquire knowledge and make sense of the world around them. Looking at these images showing different play settings, what do you think children are gaining from each play setting? You may share your thoughts in the chat box if you wish. Left is a free play setting. Here, children have opportunities to learn communication and collaboration through having to share these blocks and possibly co-build together. On the right is guided play. You have an adult role, and the adult is guiding the children through their exploration. You can also see that the children are going to have a product that shares similarities, as the materials have been carefully curated, and each child has a bottle-like item that they are working on. Moving on, there are a lot of conversations around different knowledge systems about how we can and should celebrate epistemic diversity. Formal institutions of learning have for years contributed to hierarchies and forms of knowledge and methods to acquiring knowledge. In our context, our colonial pasts have also contributed to these hierarchies that continue to dictate which methods to knowing are more important than others. Celebrating epistemic diversity helps us utilize and value different knowledge systems. This can only expand our collective understanding and unleash our potential. We can learn through relationships, cultures, faith, languages, sporting activities, gardening, cooking, and so forth. Through all of these, we can learn about ourselves, we can learn about where we come from, our strengths and weaknesses, and so forth. While play in itself is a way of learning, it is also important to note that all the other modes can incorporate play for more effective and pleasurable learning experiences. While we get to understanding the learning benefits of play, it is important for us to also challenge ourselves to simply appreciate and value play for the pleasure and freedom it brings to you. According to UNICEF, only 29% of South Africa's children have access to safe play areas. That makes 71% of the total population of children in this country that is denied the access to safe play. Think about your route to work or some places you usually visit. Where do you see children play safely? You may share in the chat box if you would like to. Rachel and I had this conversation as well about how little we see places for children to play in our own respective environments. And even in terms of visual engagement, you find way more visuals that are aimed at adults to keep them entertained and engaged, but little that is aimed at children. 2016 stats from the International Labour Organization revealed that 72.1 million children are estimated to be in child labor in Africa, which is the highest anywhere. Most child labor is unpaid, and most children in child labor work on family farms and family enterprises. This is just a little view into how societally our lives have become organized around the idea of work and building a work ethic. This is drummed into us from a very young age. With this in mind, play and pleasure are political as they push towards an entirely new model of society and a new way of being. Our current state of society shames play and makes us derive our value and worth based on our work. The rare times we do play, we are paying for it. We have become subjects to an exploitative economic system that demands our time to no limit for basic survival. If we were to value play, it would mean valuing our imagination, our creativity, our freedom, and entertaining the idea that we always have an option of creating new models of society and new models of being. At the core of play is freedom. To play with others is to imagine new organizational rules. We have to imagine what Africa could look like if we were to find a new tango between work and play. By making it freely and safely accessible for children, are we not planting the seeds for a new future beyond capitalism and hyper-independence? What are the potentials of joy, pleasure, and connectivity for all in a world where play is prioritized and valued? The global conversation and movement on playful cities is quite large, but is unfortunately quite dominated by the West and makes it harder for resources contextualized to Africa to be accessed. Because of this, we're challenged to create safe play opportunities while creating very new contextual approaches in our placemaking and urban development approaches. Our continent presents us with unique opportunities and complexities. This is said with consideration and awareness, of course, that Africa also has these various regions with diverse cultures, varying political landscapes, etc. However, while we have differences, we also have shared struggles, such as poverty and colonial legacies. A lot of children on the continent travel long distances to schools. And yes, we should fight for better spatial planning that brings good schools closer to where families are. But in this fight, there's room to also consider how current experiences can be improved in small ways. Consider transport hubs. How can they become safe, playful landscapes? This is a playable wall in Lexington, Kentucky, which was placed in one of their main bus stations that services 5,000 people a day. A lot of young children spend time with their mothers who work in markets. How can these environments be more playable? These are two examples, one from Brussels and the other from Accra by Morfra Foundation, which shows two different activations aimed at markets where mothers and children spend a lot of their time in. Adjacent to that, I show how dead spaces can also be activated for playful learning and more playable landscapes. And these are two activations in which Play Africa collaborated with other parties to create activations in streets where children could spend more time to play. There are also possibilities for creative solutions to emerge when we begin to question and understand the laws for infrastructure in public spaces, for example. What limitations or what opportunities rise from these laws? What low-cost materials are accessible to you in your environment? And how can you playfully innovate around them? I'll make an example of Mexico. An example is how Mexico has developed, An example is how Mexico has developed a playground typology that dates back from the 1930s. This playground typology mainly makes use of concrete and inventive sculptural elements in landscapes. Often the elements are designed to offer communities various ways of appropriating the spaces. Both children and adults play and connect in these spaces, continually finding new ways of using the spaces over time. What they have been trying to do over the years is continue to innovate around this playground typology while implementing the playgrounds as communal spaces in targeted neighborhoods where indoor living space is very limited and gives little freedom to families. The US and Europe, for example, does not and cannot make use of this typology due to the restrictions put on creative freedom for spaces like this. However, in Mexico, the low cost and durability of concrete is another pro and makes their own typology more preferable over other high maintenance, high cost, and low durability playgrounds. As a result of these and other contextual consideration, this adaptable typology that allows creative use of space was born. Some of the questions I would like to ask to the people here with us today. What are some of the African typologies that you know of or you have seen coming out of your region? Or what are the possibilities of a contextually relevant typology coming out of your region? What kind of knowledge sharing and experimenting do we need to consider on the continent? Increasing access to play is a communal effort. Beyond increased safe play spaces, we need to ensure that children's time to play is actually available to them. They need the time to gain more opportunities to playfully learn and discover themselves through engaging environments. I will now play a little video from a Philadelphia Playful Learning Landscapes initiative, which was implemented in Johannesburg, South Africa, and a few other cities across the world. It beautifully illustrates and combines some of what I have spoken about thus far, from how children can benefit from guided play and the ways in which subtle collective communal changes from designers to caregivers can have a great impact on children's experiences.
Meet Tembi and her little son Kwezi. They're about to set off on their weekly shopping trip. Tembi is not looking forward to it. Tembi wishes she was able to afford better toys to keep Kwezi occupied, books to help him learn. What Tembi doesn't know is that just by talking with Kwezi, she's helping his brain develop, building knowledge and teaching vocabulary. And the beauty of these simple, loving, learning interactions is that they can happen anywhere, even on a shopping trip. Tembi and Kwezi notice the colourful, playful signage as soon as they enter the store. As tempted as Tembi is to get her weekly shopping trip over and done with, she can't help but follow the prompts on the intriguing signs. Kwezi points. Tembi reads the prompts back to him, and soon they're talking back and forth, learning as they shop. Tembi's interactions with her son helps Kwezi's language development and plants the seeds for lifelong learning. For the first time in ages, Tembi actually enjoys the shopping experience, and Kwezi doesn't have his usual temper tantrum. Returning home, Tembi and Kwezi continue to talk together. Tembi tells Kwezi how much she's looking forward to going back to that store again next week for some more shopping fun. Stefunda, turning a routine shopping trip into a learning adventure.
This is a lovely example of guided play. As an additional comment to that, an impact assessment from this initiative showed a 33% increase in caregiver child talk in low-income neighborhoods and nowhere near as high in high-income neighborhoods. Low-income neighborhoods had a much lower baseline in terms of the occurrences of such behaviors. And I think this is also quite telling of which areas these initiatives need to target more. Some of the challenges we recognize about making play accessible is that, as some of us may have realized in this session so far, there are limiting perceptions surrounding the idea of play that are the reason for the current limited opportunities for it to occur. Think about your own childhood. What perceptions of play do the adults around you hold? When and how did you play? Did you have access to safe, playful environments? You may also share your responses in the chat box. It can be difficult to note how play is beneficial to child development or your well-being in general if your childhood experiences did not offer you positive insights to it and safe play was not accessible. Thinking of it this way can help with finding ways to redefine or deconstruct the way play is viewed by society. Knowledge about play's value needs to become more accessible to professionals, families, educators, and so forth. We need to start questioning ourselves what it means to speak of inclusivity without talking of children, or to speak of sustainability in our ecosystem without the consideration of 40% of the continent. Speaking to the notion of designing with children, children's capabilities are often underestimated when it comes to contributing to the design process. Multiple studies have been conducted that support Play Africa's view of children as agents of change. Evidence shows that children are capable of identifying their needs, curating their own environments, and creatively problem solving. This information should encourage urban actors to value including the very voices, ideas, and desires of the children beyond what child psychologists may stipulate regarding children's needs. Co-design processes create opportunities for children to build up a feeling of belonging and ownership towards an intervention or initiative. This can increase the impact of an initiative as more children are more likely to use the space and more likely to take care of it as well if they are part of the process. Participatory processes like this are also valuable in that they can transform children's attitudes towards their own lives. It is a way of gently planting the seeds for them to innovate and be creative with their own lives and their communities. It is also a valuable approach that supports and enriches the progression of design practice by inspiring innovations for ecosystemic design approaches. Play Africa sees children as agents of change and as full citizens and full members of their society. As a result, our work makes use of participatory approaches. Play Africa deeply believes in an approach to designing cities that transcends the idea that only expert knowledge is useful. To speak more on Play Africa as an organization, it is a globally recognized children's museum, the first of its kind in Southern Africa, and it is based at the iconic Constitution Hill in Johannesburg. Play Africa's work aims to make cities more playful in South Africa through various initiatives, some of which I'll briefly speak on. These play and playful learning initiatives are an opportunity for children to create, discover, and connect with one another. They are made through a decentralized museum model that leverages public spaces, catalyzing innovations in creative and transformative parent engagement and social cohesion. Programs and exhibits are also designed to be replicable and a part of a much larger global movement that believes in the power of play and experiential hands-on learning. These are some of the Play Africa initiatives and programs. Many of these have been adapted and replicated in several locations. They fit into three major categories: placemaking programming, children's participation programming, and programs that empower children through design thinking. I will not be getting into the details of each program due to time constraints, but they have been successfully carried out. And this is an attempt at a brief overview that tries to capture the vastness of the goals achieved by these programs. Shifting perceptions on how public street space can be used by pedestrians, reclaiming spaces for community use, fostering a sense of curiosity in the natural world, writing of books for children, designing parks with children, building awareness about xenophobia and its consequences, exploring concepts of inclusion, diversity, empathy, and Ubuntu, engaging children in discovery and exploration of city streets. And there is so much more that I could not cover. To speak to a more specific program, Play Africa is currently running the I Am a Scientist program. The program expects to reach over 7,000 children across South Africa, making use of a traveling exhibition that introduces children to science through playful learning. In the early plan, identify the areas where they were most interested in and wanted to learn more about. The exhibition was launched last week in Soweto, and some of the photographs here are from that launch. I absolutely love the nature of a traveling exhibition as it speaks well to Play Africa's belief that in implementing playful cities, we need to meet parents and children where they are. So what I've covered so far is meant to hopefully motivate you in considering more opportunities for play. I know this is about playful cities, but it can go beyond that. And I think culture of work infiltrate our existence. We need to imagine and create a culture of play. If we can start now by doing it just for children, I think we stand a great chance at radically changing the future of society beyond playful city design by introducing a new ethos that values imagination, creativity, pleasure, and all the things that our capitalist society and work-centered society deprives us of. Play Africa is doing a lot of fun and incredible work that could potentially turn our society of independence into one of interdependence by making cities more playful, making play more accessible, and getting children's participation in these innovations. Play Africa can only make this transformation probable if more professionals and more community groups continue to contribute to this work. To motivate this work, we have a toolkit on the way for urban professionals and urban actors across the board. The toolkit aims to offer an Afrocentric and adaptable approach to co-designing with children for placemaking initiatives. The methodology of this approach makes use of design thinking, and Rachel will expand on that a bit more and teach you all about it. But you can also expect the toolkit at the end of June. It will be accessible virtually, and if you want to keep up with us regarding that, do follow Play Africa on all major social media platforms, including LinkedIn. I will now hand over to Rachel, who will give us a mini training on the Play Africa methodology to design thinking and how it can facilitate participatory placemaking with children. Thank you.
Shrika. All right. First things first. Let's just take a minute and stop and think. Imagine a playful space. What do you see? What do you hear? And importantly, who do you see? Take a second to just jot down a few words. What do you see? What do you hear? Who do you see? What does your playful space in a city look like? Maybe you thought of a public park and a playground equipment. Parks are lovely, but that's not all that playful spaces can be. Here are some examples of some playful spaces in cities. At the top here, we have a bus stop in Philadelphia. Next, we have some steps in Sao Paulo. And next to that, a park and a path in Nairobi. Yes, these spaces were designed for children, but by designing for children, the whole community benefits. Just to reiterate, 40% of the population in Africa is 15 or under. We cannot ignore 40% of the population. So maybe you're asking yourself, yes, I'm on board. I know I need to design for and with children, but how? Well, luckily, Play Africa is here to help. We are creating a free adaptable workshop to help you engage with and empower children to imagine improved communities. There are lots of different ways you can empower children and engage with children, but we've decided to use design thinking. Design thinking is a strategic process to solve problems. We take our inspiration from the method developed at the Stanford D.school, and if you'd like to learn more, they have a lot of great resources on their website. The steps we use are on the left: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, and share. I'll explain these further in just a moment. For those of you who are familiar with design thinking, you might be wondering, can I really do design thinking with children? Yes, you can. I have done design thinking with 6-year-olds. It looks different with children than it does with adults. We don't expect a child's painting of a dog to look photorealistic. We expect an approximation. With design thinking, we also expect an approximation. It doesn't mean there's any less value in going through the process. It simply means that we acknowledge that children's progress through the process is in itself a learning experience. And design thinking is so very valuable for children. It encourages the 21st century skills that are very popular in schools right now of collaboration and creativity. And following an organized thought process is also incredibly valuable for children to experience. But what can be most powerful is getting the opportunity and being encouraged to go back and make improvements. Creating multiple iterations of a product might be very familiar to you and your work, but it's not a very common practice in schools. Design thinking gives children the chance to learn skills they can carry with them for the rest of their lives. Design thinking often actually looks more like this. Maybe this is a little bit closer to how you work. Think about the flexibility and creativity required to work like this, to go back and forth and back and forth. Think about how valuable those skills are to you as an adult. Now imagine helping children develop those skills at a young age. That is the value of design thinking. So now we'll show you what our adaptable curriculum looks like in action. Okay. This is one of our pilots done in Malusi, an informal settlement in Pretoria. The children began by empathizing. We want to understand how children feel in their community and how other children might feel. The group that did this pilot decided to use a mapping exercise to also encourage the development of visual spatial skills. Children were given little emoji pictures to paste around the map to describe how they feel in different parts of the community. We saw lots of hearts and smiley faces at the youth center where the children were, and we saw lots of frowny faces on the busy streets and in the dense, poorly lit nursery. So even if children aren't able to access the vocabulary or their emotions, the picture cues help children understand how they feel in different parts. Next, children define the issues they recognize in their neighborhoods. So children said, there are too many rocks on the road, lots of accidents, and too many buses and taxis. And then another child said, build a school nearby because children have to go very far to school. So let's just stop and think about what these two statements tell us about the community as viewed by the children. The child is making a connection between the poor roads and accidents, and this makes roads scary places for children. The second child lives far from school, as is true of so many children in South Africa. And that long bus ride or taxi ride takes away many opportunities to play. Next, children ideate. We ask children to sketch ideas of something that they could invent to fix those problems that they defined. We always encourage children to think of themselves as inventors. What can you invent to solve the problem? So let's look at these two statements from children. One child wanted to make a safety place for children. People who don't have work guard children to give them work. And another child wanted to distribute fruit trees because other people don't have enough to eat. So the first child is expressing concerns about child safety and unemployment. The second child is expressing concerns about food security. So we might think that children are oblivious to issues like this, but they are not. In these two short phrases, you now have a better understanding of the challenges faced in this community. The next step is to prototype. This is really fun. This is where children get to use materials to build versions of their inventions. Now, often children get so excited by the materials that what they build and what they drew are not always so related, but that's okay. We want this to be a playful learning experience. So in the top picture, what we see here is a school. This child wanted a school close to home so she wouldn't have to travel far. Later, she added some classrooms around the outside and made a center area for resting and playing. And then below, you can see it's a beginning of a park with some trees and some nice places to sit. Then after making the prototypes, we test and share. Now this group, as again, it's an adaptable workshop, they chose to keep the testing and sharing very informal, and they gave children opportunities to share about their prototypes in a really informal setting, which met the needs of that particular group of children. So testing meant asking questions like, where do the children eat at the school? And what could we do to create some shade for a hot day? Other groups will approach the testing and sharing phases differently. And again, that's great. It's an adaptable workshop. And as it is an adaptable workshop, we're going to try it now. So please get a little bit of paper and pencil. We're going to try out this workshop. Here, now, as we are adults and not children, it's going to look a little different, and that's all right. We're going to go through the steps so you get an experience a bit of what this is like. So let's begin. This is a hypothetical situation. Here's an area of space where children have to wait for the taxis, and it's near a busy road. The children might say things like, "We wait for the taxi to take us to school. I don't like waiting, it's too dusty. There's nothing to do while we wait. It's hot in the sun." Okay, we're starting to understand how children feel. Now let's ask them to define the problem. Some little kids fall on the rocks. Our shoes get muddy when it rains. The people who live there don't like us to get too close. There are too many fast cars on the road. Okay, now we have an understanding of how children interpret the problems of waiting in this area. So now it's your time to ideate. You have 1 minute to sketch an invention or intervention that could solve the issues the children identified. I'll put this up here so you can see the space. You have a minute to draw. Go. Okay, try and finish up your last sketches. Now, normally with children, of course, we would give more time and provide more time for conversation. But as adults, we're going to do this a little bit differently. Now, unfortunately, we cannot send you a box of Play-Doh and popsicle sticks and other tools. So instead for our prototyping phase, think as an adult. If you're going to make this invention or intervention that you just drew, what materials will you need? What low-cost or recycled materials could you use? And how could children help create the prototypes? How could you make a full-size prototype and get children involved? How could children be involved in creating a final product? Just think about those for a second. Now, after prototyping, we test. We're going to test my drawing. Okay, here's my quick sketch of how I think I could change that space. So when we do testing in a more formal way, we like to guide children in giving feedback. So these are the questions that we like to use to guide that feedback. What do you like about the invention? What do you not understand about the invention? And what could make the invention even better? So in mine, you can see I've added some pallet fencing, some stumps for playing and sitting on them, tire planters, a metal shade, some rocks as a bit of a barrier. So now, what do you like about the invention? What do you not understand about the invention? And what can make the invention even better? You can type that in the chat. I'm ready for the feedback. In some cases, during the workshop, you might want to do the testing that goes back to prototyping, goes back to testing, back to prototype, back to test. You can do that multiple times. We would suggest doing it at least 2 times to really help children understand that message of you can keep on creating iterations to make sure that you're creating the best invention possible. Oh, I'm glad I'm getting some feedback. Great. Okay. The next part after we test and then create better prototypes and test them and create better prototypes, then we share. Ooh. Now, we like to make this a bit of a game. Maybe you are familiar with trying to explain your idea or vision to someone who battles to understand you. So we try to make this a game. So I'm going to try it. I'm going to describe an invention to solve one of the issues mentioned by the children, and your job is to draw what I'm describing. Are you ready? Okay. On the bottom, there are 2 tires. Okay, draw your 2 tires. Then, coming out of the tires are 2 big poles. Between the poles, there's some wood for sitting. And then on the top of the poles, there's some metal for the shade. Okay. You ready to share your drawings? Does your sketch look like mine? The point of this activity is to help children understand that there are many challenges in communication and that showing and demonstrating is an incredibly powerful way of communicating. After this short exercise, we provide children with guided questions to help them share their inventions with the group. We ask things like, how does this invention fit into the neighborhood? And how does it work? And how does it help solve the problem? At the close of the workshop, we encourage children to reflect on their learning and draw or write about their feelings during the workshop and things that they learned during the workshop. We also like to ask any observing adults, like parents or guardians, to also fill out observation forms to document what was surprising to them or what they learned about their child or what they saw and how they might be able to bring it to the home. This also helps us collect information for monitoring and evaluation, but it really helps children learn the valuable skill of reflective learning. So depending on the group, children might have worked on creating an invention for a specific space, or the facilitators might instead take the thoughts gathered to another iteration, or take the information to a council meeting or a community meeting and push for changes. How this information is used next is completely up to the facilitators. But no matter what, children will leave feeling empowered to make changes in their community. At this point, we'll pause for some questions. I know we've been going for a long time, so please, if you have some questions, please raise your hand or type it in the chat.
And maybe you don't have questions per se, but you have comments or anything that you would like to reflect on that you'd want to share with us, that would be great too.
Okay, I see a question about how the projects have been received by the communities in which they have been undertaken. So each time this workshop is done, it's with a different group of stakeholders. For example, this past weekend, a group did this workshop in Lenasia, and the group doing the workshop is a community-based group. And they have spent a lot of time getting the community on board, really focusing on children in the community. So in that case, the community was 100% on board. And this is just also an exploration to get voices out and get children involved. So where this group decides to take it next, then we'll learn more about how the community interprets the next steps.
I'm seeing a question. Let me see which one. Well, there are a lot of questions actually. So one says, love your process. Sometimes it is hard to get adults and designers to trust kids. How do you convince them that it is necessary to design with children? This is also a conversation that we have had multiple times because I think the real issue is that like we're talking about celebrating epistemic diversity in this presentation, and I think it speaks to the idea of I think it's a very personal endeavor. We have to get to a point as a society where we don't only look to expert knowledge. And unfortunately, our society has become driven towards that. So I think it has to start on I would say it has to start on a very individual basis where you deconstruct the way you view children first of all, and the way you view different ways of learning or knowing. And in that way, I think you create room for yourself to actually be able to listen firstly, because when you don't have that room or space that you're creating for yourself to be able to listen, to be able to learn from others, then it's really hard. It is really hard to get to a point where designers, for example, value children's contributions. But I think the more we have individuals that take it upon themselves to try this process and actually create more precedents that are available to other designers, then I think that is how that transformation will happen. So we need to make the knowledge around children being able to contribute to these processes more available. We need more individuals or groups taking on the work and creating future precedents for other designers. And I think that's one of the means. Yeah, without precedents, it's really hard for people to imagine this process as a successful process. And fortunately, we have been able to engage children several times successfully. And I think that's partly why this toolkit is very valuable, because if you get to read it and use it, you will get to have a deeper understanding of how this is very possible from the precedents that we'll have in the toolkit, and from just how detailed the toolkit is and how it pushes for this adaptability as well. I don't know if Rachel has something to add.
So I think also, let's bring up the fact again that Africa is 40% 15 and younger. If you were designing a business and you were ignoring 40% of your target market, I think you might be in a bit of trouble. So I think, yes, bring in new voices and go at it in multiple ways, but let's also bring in the numbers. Okay, looking at the next question, how can we implement this in rural areas where there are limited resources for learners? Again, the challenge is resources, of course, but with this workshop, it's meant to be flexible based on whatever your setting is. So if you can think of ways to use the materials around you, there's no reason why you couldn't do the same workshop. It just will look different, and that's fine, because you're then designing with children for your space.
And for example, with this approach where you have like model building exercises, there's opportunities to, you will see that in different settings, different people will carry it out very differently, but still following the methodology. So you might have in one setting where children are exploring this workshop with store-bought clay and charts and colorful this and that, and you could still have this exploration successfully carried out with homemade clay or actual clay from the ground. So I think there's options and there's room for that adaptability, and just making use of whatever is accessible to you to just have children create. I don't know if that successfully answers that question, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. How would one ensure that there is adequate ownership of the project play space once the facilitation and implementation is done? So at the closing section of the toolkit, we give some strong suggestions as to how to take it forward. And we have a strong emphasis on getting the community involved or getting the relevant stakeholders involved. Because if you are doing this just on your own, that ownership of the project is going to be challenging. So we're strongly suggesting, after gathering these children's voices and empowering children, to take it further and get that community involvement that you'll need to be successful. And then once you've got more community involvement, you could possibly do the workshop again. There's no reason you couldn't just keep on doing it to get more and more children and more of the community involved. And I saw a question about involving parents. We always invite parents to observe Play Africa programs, because it helps with child safety, but also we find that parents don't often get opportunities to see their children in learning settings that are not a school. So parents like to often learn quite a bit about their children through observation.
Just in addition to what Rachel has mentioned, I think the question from Katleho, the one on adequate ownership of the project, and the question from Dipuo on parent and caregiver involvement, I think they speak to each other, maybe not directly, but I think they do speak to each other in that I think what's central to this process as well is that you have to kind of foster a collaborative approach in general. And this does not just start with when you sit down with the children to do this workshop, but in your process of actually getting into the community. I think it has to start from, if you're an outsider getting into a specific community, it has to start from actually wanting to know how things are done in this community. And from those stages, I think you're getting yourself familiarized with the people in the community. You're starting to lay groundwork for, when you're starting to lay groundwork for this workshop, you're engaging various stakeholders. You're looking at potential sites of intervention. Who uses that site of intervention? It could be vendors who work in that space. You want to have conversations with them about the potential of making that space very more playful. You want to engage the parents about the potential of hosting this workshop with their children. And I think when you take design processes in that manner, you're already in small incremental ways building a sense of ownership towards this project, because you're not coming with this attitude that this is my idea for you that you will then have to use, but you're kind of renegotiating this idea into more, this is our idea, rather than it being your idea. It's not supposed to be your idea. It's supposed to be the community's idea. And your role as an architect or as a designer or as a community group is not to own the project, but to facilitate the design process for this project or space that belongs to the community. So I think that's where co-design becomes like a very intricate process, because it's not just the workshop. You shouldn't see it as just the workshop. You should see it as a very long procedure where you're getting everyone involved. I don't know if that helps, but yeah.
And then I see a question on the effective environment around children, how that defines children's lives. How do you combine it to play? Well, I guess that's the whole argument we're making, is that the environment is so important in child development. And right now, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of areas where children live that are designed for children. So we're trying to push for that change because it will children's development and it'll make your cities more playful and fun, and not just for children, but also for adults.
I love the comment from Kate, which says, I think it is a great way to find new and non-traditional play spaces. In local government, we often design play parks with a standard design and using set equipment. Engaging with children would help us to see where we could create additional spaces that are much more practical and effective. And I absolutely agree with that. I think there's a need for the approach to place spaces to change and to just become more innovative, and also maybe not seeing play spaces as like about Play Africa, that it makes use of this decentralized approach. How can we look at our environments as spaces where we can just make various injections of play? How can we make our environments, our cities as a whole, just more playful and not really look at it as in this neighborhood, there's a green space, incorporating playful spaces. You can even start looking at the signage across a neighborhood. How can it just become more playful and more engaging? Your street lights, how can they become interactive? Street signs don't just have to be these poles that function just to give light. They can actually become like playable elements in the landscape. So I think the moment we start viewing play that way, it can radically change how we design as well. And yes, the toolkit will be available at the end of June. And as we said before, please follow Play Africa on social media, and that will we will be talking about the launch and the exact dates and so forth. So yeah, please do.
So as we've been chatting about this and talking about it, let's reflect back on some of those questions that Figo asked us earlier. Thinking about your work, how does it empower children? How can it be more inclusive of children's voices and their creativity? And how can it harness more play opportunities? We're hoping that now that you've heard more about our work and more about play, you might be able to answer some of these. If not, some other questions for you to think about. How can you make designing for and with children part of your routine, part of your checklist? How can you include children? How could something you're currently working on benefit from including children's voices? Or can you develop another way to include children in some placemaking? If you've got responses or ideas about these, please do share. We'd really like to hear them or see them in the chat, please.
I'm just going to speak to Dipo's question, and if I don't answer it properly, please, Dipo, you're free to elaborate further. But I think Play Africa's work is centered around stirring that curiosity and creating that exposure. I think it's not just about implementing playable spaces. And as you may have seen from projects like I Am a Scientist, I think one of the things that it centers is stirring that curiosity. And even like the workshop itself, we encourage people to not see it as a process that is the placemaking workshop. We encourage facilitators to not only see the process as a process that's meant to only lead to a physical playable environment, but as a process that, as I may have spoken earlier, that plant the seeds in children's minds and thinking and way of being for them to just reconsider the way they do certain things, or consider that they are capable of making change in their communities, that their contributions are valuable. So sorry. So it really is about stirring that curiosity and just supporting their development as well as children, and changing the way they think about things.
Thank you very much for all of your great questions and your enthusiasm. We hope that you will keep in touch with us and try out our toolkit in your own community and let us know how it goes, and show us how you were able to empower children to see their improved communities.